Welcome back to another episode of 10 Minute Mood. Today, I am joined by Dr. Veena Sothieson, who is a clinical psychologist on our team here at Sydney City Psychology. She has a particular interest in working with people around eating problems. So thank you for joining me, Veena.
Thank you, Aspasia. It's great to be here.
So I thought we might just jump in by talking about what are we talking about when we say eating problems? What does that mean and what might that look like?
Yeah. I mean, I guess first of all, just to kind of recognize that in society these days, we've got, certain ways that food and eating and body image and, the ideal being a thin person is portrayed. And so when we're talking about eating problems, what we're talking about is the development of certain thoughts, beliefs, ideas regarding one's shape, weight, image, and how someone might use food.
Right. So a lot of this is based first in the way that someone is thinking about body image, or as you said, shape, weight, something to do with their physicality. And then the eating, the changes to their eating happen as a result, usually of the way that they're thinking about themselves.
Yeah. And there's also an aspect of this where, sometimes it's really hard to kind of achieve a certain way of looking and appearing based on these ideals. So some people might also, have a sense of achievement and success and control when they use food as a way to achieve that ideal.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think now more than ever, the images that we're presented are just so unrealistic. And I can imagine too that when things seem particularly outside of one's control, when there's so much going on in someone's life that seems out of their control, that this is an area that they might feel they can really hone in on and gain some traction and control around.
Yeah.
What does this end up looking like? How might someone who's experiencing eating problems, how might they be eating? What do we mean by that?
Yeah. So I mean, commonly we would see it beginning sort of around the teenage years, when there are changes hormonally with puberty, and there's comparisons with peers. And I just want to also point out, so around that time, it might not be uncommon for people to diet, for instance, but not everyone who diets develops an eating problem. Right. And I think there's a combination here in terms of genetics, and you can almost think about it like with genetics, you're almost loading the gun, and then based on what the environment is like and what you've learned in terms of the way you've learned to think about your body, the way that other people around you are talking about it, the way society is sort of portraying it, and what else is sort of going on in your life in terms of moods and events and stresses, that almost kind of sets that gun off. And then it can get as serious as developing an eating disorder.
Right.
But when we're talking about eating problems, what we're talking about is, perhaps things like restricting what you're eating or restraining, and, having certain diets that you might be trying, avoiding certain food groups because they're bad or unhealthy, or they're perceived as like junk foods. You might, be very methodical about the way that you're eating. So it could be that you don't eat at certain times of days. There's long gaps in between when you're eating. You might try and fast. You might count calories, or, weigh the foods that you're eating. And then when you think about that in the context also of, appearance and body image, there might be some things around sort of checking, the fat on your body, or looking at yourself in mirrors, or weighing yourself multiple times a day or once a day, every single day of the week. And so it can develop into these sort of behaviours that are very focused on eating and weight and shape.
Yes, and it sounds, as you speak, it sounds like it's very tied to outcome. This checking component to assess whether or not the approach is achieving some particular outcome, as opposed to maybe something like trying to eat in some particular healthy way just for the sake of that. There sounds like there's a component here about actually checking to see if there is an impact on the body and the way one looks.
Yes, exactly. And so it's like trying to control and achieve a certain way.
Yeah.
And also being aware that once this kind of cycle starts, there's almost a correlation in the sense that, you know, the more you focus on food, the more you try to restrict or diet or, you know, limit your eating in some way, the more you become focused on that, it can, you know, start to lose, you might start to lose weight, for instance. And then once you start to lose weight, you know, you might get comments about that might reinforce what you're doing. And then you might, you know, be more motivated to focus on this. And then so it takes, again, more of a predominance in your life. And then unfortunately, what tends to happen is, you know, in these extreme sort of cases where it develops into an eating disorder. So because you're not eating appropriately for your nutritional requirements, for what is required for your body to develop and for your brain to actually also be nourished, what tends to happen is there are some effects in terms of signs and symptoms of starvation and low weight, which then start to look like, you know, becoming quite sensitive to being full, you know, losing cues around hunger, maybe becoming more irritable in terms of mood, having a hard time concentrating, and just really getting quite focused and obsessed and quite rigid in terms of, you know, what you're doing around that. So then that kind of, again, has more of an impact on your social life, your emotional life, what you're doing throughout the day and what you're focusing a lot of your time on.
Yeah, and I imagine your relationships as well in that very key time in our life, especially in adolescence. And as you're talking too, I guess I'm struck by the sense that we've discussed how some of these eating problems can come about as a way to try and to bring some control back to one's life. And this really sounds like control on overdrive, a control that is almost to the point that life becomes very restricted and focus becomes very restricted, and it's having an impact on our physiological system, which again is important because of the range of effects that will have, as you said, on mood, irritability, our ability to have enough energy to go out and do the things physically that we want to. Is there anything else that you might encourage someone who's wondering if they have an eating problem to reflect on in terms of whether or not the way that they're going about eating is something they might want to address?
So I think the main one is if you're noticing kind of significant changes in kind of behaviors around food and eating. And also, I haven't mentioned, but exercise is another one. So, you know, there's this, you know, we can generally exercise for health and well-being, but when it's kind of linked in with this need for control, it tends to kind of go into the domain of over-exercising. So there might be some rules around that, like I have to exercise once or twice a day, I have to exercise before meals, or you know, maybe the way that you're exercising is excessive in the sense that maybe you're doing 50 minutes of cardio every single day of the week, and you might get some injuries and you might still keep exercising. So one of the things to watch out for is, are there changes that are quite significant in terms of behaviors, significant weight loss or weight gain, or even just doing things like vomiting, you know, using laxatives, even changes in mood, like irritability, like you mentioned, hoarding, sort of some kind of ritualistic sort of behavior, difficulty concentrating, maybe a reduction in kind of performance academically or extracurricularly. Maybe you're not going out as much, withdrawing, avoiding. Those kinds of things are signs and symptoms to kind of watch out for.
In terms of supports. If someone who is listening is worried about their own eating, or is concerned potentially about a loved one, what kind of supports are available out there for eating problems?
Yeah, so I think the first thing is if you're noticing somebody who is struggling with eating or appearance or weight, and you're concerned about them, the key thing is to kind of approach them with quite a non-judgmental attitude, meaning, you might kind of check in and say, hey, I noticed some of these things. I'm just wondering what's happening. How are you going? So asking questions, being kind, offering support. The first thing that I would recommend is maybe going to is connecting with your GP. So I think the medical professional is quite an important person in this process, because they have the ability to physically examine you, to determine whether your height, weight, whether any kind of changes in that are significant in terms of your development. And sometimes, if the eating problem is quite significant or severe, medical safety is really important. And then your GP might actually refer you on to a psychologist who might specialize or have an interest in eating disorders. And you might have an assessment with them, and they might offer therapies such as cognitive behavior therapy, or Maudsley family-based therapy. So there are different therapies that are evidence-based for eating disorders that can help. And I think the key thing is, if you have somebody who can support you, like a parent or a significant other, a partner, I think that's going to be also very helpful, because you might need that support as you go about kind of help, trying to solve this or work through this, and attend appointments.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Veena. That's been really interesting, and 10 minutes really didn't do it justice, but I think it's a great overview for anyone who is new to the area, or who just wanted to find out a little bit more about eating problems. But perhaps we'll have you on again another day for a longer, more in-depth
thank
episode.
you, Aspasia. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks for listening to another episode of 10 Minute Mood. We would love to hear your feedback on future topics and what you're interested in hearing more about. So please leave a comment or send an email to let us know. And as always, if you or someone you care about would like extra support, our psychologists at Sydney City Psychology are available for online or in-person sessions. Give us a call or an email to discuss the options. Until next time, keep safe and well.